Things history left out about the Battle of Midway. 6 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, they launched another invasion with the intention of occupying Midway Atoll and destroying U.S. naval might in the Pacific Ocean. Things, however, did not go as planned. As a consequence, on June 4th through 7th, 1942, a naval combat took place that would prove to be one of the most significant actions in the Pacific theater during World War II. Examine the methods used by both sides, the armament employed, and what made the Battle of Midway one of the most significant of the war. The goal of the battle was to destroy the United States' remaining aircraft carriers. Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor attack and the supreme commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet, led the Battle of Midway. His ultimate aim for the fight was to eliminate any surviving U.S. aircraft carriers that could have survived the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The Doolittle Air Raid, also referred to as the Tokyo Air Raid, which was the United States' first attack on the Japanese mainland, also served as a catalyst for the Battle of Midway. It took off from the USS Hornet. The Pacific Fleet was led by Chester W. Nimitz. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz made sure he was completely prepared before heading to the Pacific Fleet, anticipating a Japanese assault on 4 or 5 aircraft carriers. He had the USS Enterprise and USS Hornet with him, as well as Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's task group, which included the USS Yorktown. The Yorktown had suffered significant damage in a prior engagement, and the Japanese feared it had been completely destroyed. They had no idea it was ready for battle and would play a pivotal role in the next conflict. The American fighter pilots were outnumbered. Japanese soldiers unleashed bombs from their aircraft ships to attack the buildings erected on Midway Island. In response, Navy, Marine, and Army pilots launched a defensive assault, quickly realizing they were vastly outnumbered. Regardless, they remained firm. The Japanese finished their initial assault on the island after 27 minutes of fighting. Following this, the Japanese said that they needed additional fighters to continue their offensive. When American bombers saw how desperate they were, they launched their own airstrike. The United States sank all 4 Japanese carriers. Hiryu remained the final Japanese aircraft carrier in the conflict after the other 3 had been sunk. Following the U.S. strike, the Hiryu conducted a counterattack, crippling Yorktown with 2 torpedoes. The Enterprise then sent 24 bombers against Hiryu, damaging it with at least 4 of their bombs and finally sinking her. At that moment, the U.S. had destroyed all of the Japanese carriers involved in the conflict, all of which had been part of the 6 that attacked Pearl Harbor. One decision changed the course of the battle. When the Americans launched their onslaught, they flew directly to where the Japanese soldiers were said to be. When they arrived, though, they were faced with nothing but the empty ocean. Instead of returning to their home base, the pilots made what Admiral Nimitz subsequently described as one of the most important decisions of the battle. They decided to explore one more region, one that seemed implausible, and it was there that they discovered the Japanese carriers. The fighters went on to destroy 3 of the 4 carriers, tipping the conflict in favor of the U.S. The United States only lost 1 aircraft carrier. After the bulk of the ships were destroyed, Japan proceeded to retire without even attempting to land on Midway Island. In an effort to eradicate all Japanese soldiers, the U.S. launched a search and destroy expedition for the last Japanese troops, which did not go as planned. 2 torpedoes fired by a Japanese I-168 submarine during the operation on June 6th destroyed the USS Yorktown. It also killed the destroyer USS Hamon. Midway Island was chosen by the Japanese for specific reasons. Yamamoto thought another Japanese assault on Pearl Island would be too perilous since the U.S. had considerably improved its land and sea forces in Hawaii. They instead looked to Midway Island, one of the United States' minor outlying islands. The site was selected because it was out of range of practically all aircraft stationed in the Hawaiian Islands and was a vital outpost of Pearl Harbor. They feared that its significance would drive the U.S. fleet out into the open ocean where it might be destroyed. code breakers from the United States played an integral part of the battle. Yamamoto's strategy to strike Midway contained a number of moving pieces. His principal strategy was to entice the United States Pacific Fleet into an assault while they were unaware of the strength of the Japanese fleet. The Japanese, on the other hand, were unaware that the U.S. had cracked their secret code for exchanging information. As a consequence, Admiral Nimitz learned Japan's whole strategy, including how powerful they were and when and where they planned to strike. One of the main reasons the U.S. won was because the U.S. Navy's intelligence unit in Hawaii cracked this code. Japan lost many more sailors than the United States. During the conflict, the Japanese Navy lost 4 aircraft carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, and 248 aircraft, as well as 3,057 men killed and 37 captured. The United States, on the other hand, suffered substantially less damage. They lost 1 aircraft carrier, 1 destroyer, 150 aircraft, 307 people were killed, and 3 were captured and hanged. Essentially, Japan's whole strategy failed, and they suffered much more losses than they had planned, with the United States claiming an unexpected triumph. An acclaimed Hollywood director shot footage of the battle. Director John Ford, well known for his westerns and collaborations with John Wayne, was an officer in the United States Naval Reserve during World War II and was charged with creating documentaries for the Navy. During the conflict, Admiral Nimitz stationed the director on Midway, where he suffered a concussion and a bullet wound during a Japanese attack. Despite this, it's stated that he did not leave his place until he obtained the essential film. Ford's video was used in the film The Battle of Midway, for which he received an Academy Award for Best Documentary. There were several reasons Japan lost the battle. While the American victory in the Battle of Midway is largely credited to their superior intelligence, Japan lost for a variety of reasons. One of these factors was the absence of Japan's most technologically sophisticated carriers, Shokaku and Zaikaku, during the fight. They were likewise ignorant of the capabilities of the American carriers. Another factor is that Japan halted the manufacture of its 2 primary strike aircraft, resulting in inferior planes being used throughout the war. Finally, American fighters surprised their aircraft carriers with an attack while they were refueling. Radar greatly helped the United States. Aside from cracking the naval code, which provided Admiral Nimitz with information on Japan's assault, radar was another useful instrument that aided the U.S. The U.S. Naval Research Laboratory created the first radar prototype in 1938, and the first systems were installed aboard U.S. naval ships in the months leading up to the assault on Pearl Harbor. The 3 carriers and other boats at Midway used radar to spot Japanese planes from a considerable distance away. The Japanese, on the other hand, had to depend only on human lookouts, which placed them at a significant disadvantage. The battle was one of 2 simultaneous attacks. The Japanese army was also trying to attack the Aleutian Islands during the start of the Battle of Midway. Many feel that this was part of a plan to confuse the U.S. and maybe pull them away from Midway, making an invasion simpler. The Battle of the Aleutian Islands occurred from June 1942 to August 1943, during which U.S. soldiers sought to dislodge Japanese sailors from 2 U.S.-owned islands off Alaska's western coast. It would turn out to be Japan's lone claim to U.S. territory throughout the conflict. Bombers played a massive role. The Japanese possessed the Mitsubishi A6M0 in 1942, which was considered the greatest carrier-based fighter jet on the globe at the time. However, the United States possessed the finest dive bomber, the Douglas SBD Dauntless, which proved to be more successful at the Battle of Midway. The Dauntless proved to be the superior weapon, allowing American pilots to deliver direct hits on the Japanese carriers throughout the conflict, thereby crippling all 4. A Japanese pilot and Marine bugler became friends years later. After learning that the Americans had not been informed about the assault, dive bomber Zenji Abe formed the Japan Friends of Pearl Harbor effect, which collected all the pilots to sign an apology letter. Then Abe and others went to Pearl Harbor for the anniversary celebration. Initially, no one addressed the gathering, Then, after being angry for many years, a Marine bugler named Richard Fisk, who had survived Pearl Harbor and Iwo Jima, made friends with Abe. They planned for Fisk to carry flowers supplied by Abe and play American and Japanese taps at Pearl Harbor every year. The pearls in Pearl Harbor became nearly extinct in the 1900s. The majority of Pearl Harbor and the surrounding terrain are now U.S. naval facilities. Many years ago, the Hawaiians gave Pearl Harbor the name Pu'uloa and valued the area more for its oysters than its pearls as a source of food. The Hawaiians used the oyster shells to make ornamental bowls and fishing hooks. Immigrants found bivalve mollusks in the water in the 1800s, and the location became known as Pearl Harbor. King Kamehameha of the island quickly started gathering pearls to suit international demand. But by the 1840s, the region had suffered from deforestation and overgrazing. Oysters had all but vanished by the early 20th century.